is going to be our third installment of our Kimi Na'awal lecture series, and we are very, very happy to have Auntie Paulette Kahalepuna here. And she will be talking about lehulu, or feather lei making, very ancient traditional art. And well, we're going to hear our presentation here.
Oh.
Mahalo for coming down.
Oh, thank you.
So without further ado, turn over to Auntie Paulette Kahalepuna. Mahalo.
First, thank you. First, to apologize. I was teaching at the shop and the phone rang and I picked it up and here's Palani's laughing voice going, "Auntie, did you forget?" I went, "Oh." I said more than that, actually. And I said, and my mom was busy with some customers from St. Andrew's Priory because they came in to buy a lei for one of the fathers that's leaving. And I have 4 students sitting at the table and they're all going, looking at me like, "Oh, she's disappearing." So I threw everything together and here I am. And fortunately, the freeway is pretty good at this point. Not always, but so got here in pretty good time. Anyway, it's always our pleasure, my mom and I, and I'm sure you've heard this before, when people do presentations or more recently when they go out to do any kind of protocol, we don't come by ourselves. You might physically see me here, but you know that surrounding us within these elements and behind me are my ancestors and people who have been in this area, whether physically here in Kapalama area or whether they were in Kalihi or Manoa or Paua Valley, but here doing the work and gathering of the feathers that we now relate to in this artwork, which is so much a love for my mom and I. My mother is my teacher. She's the beginning of my energies when it comes to doing of the hulu. As a student, looking up the heights here, when I was at Kamehameha School, I was aware that my mother did this work. In 1955, her teacher was Leilani Fernandez. And Auntie Lei was a companion and friend and also one who studied with Kamukila Campbell. And she was one of the caretakers out at Lanikuhonua, which then we called Baba's Point. You know, now we've become politically more astute to the districts and areas. But Auntie Lei was my mom's teacher. And they were both involved with Aloha Week back then. And my mom ran unsuccessfully in 1955 for Aloha Week Queen for Oahu and didn't win. So she was in the court for a year. And then she thought, you know, they always need volunteers to work. So I'm going to volunteer and be in their wardrobe area. That way they can see what a statuesque Hawaiian lady I am and they need me to be queen. Well, 20 years later, my mother was queen in 1975. And so this is my mama today. And, but in her learning from Auntie Lei, it was to restore and replenish those feather items that were used by the court at that time. Repairing kahilis, replacing the feather leis that were worn as the women's adornments and such, became part of her daily thing in 5 years. Then after she left Aloha Week as a volunteer, she went on to just kind of doing it for herself, just kind of piddling with it. Then in 1970, well, go back a little bit. In 1962, I approached her when I was a junior in high school, and I said, you know, Mom, I need to do extra credit. So could you teach me how to do a feather lei? And she says, I've just been waiting for you to ask. And so that was my introduction to making of a feather lei. And my mother's belief, and so many others, when you do anything, you make something, the first item is yours. You don't give it away. You keep it. But then, of course, my mother is my teacher. So in 1976, when the Hokulea took its voyage to Tahiti, they were looking for feather lei to put on the ki'i. So my mother gave my 2 very first leis to the Hokulea. And I thought, oh, not supposed to give your first work away, but I guess if the kumu gives it away, it's okay. And so off it went. And my parents were also very instrumental in reproducing the feather pennants that were used on the sails of the canoe for direction finding. And so that also went with the canoe. Upon their return to Kualoa Park, which was very successful, they removed items off of the canoe and placed them in the hale that was out there at the time. So now remember, this is mid-70s. At one point in time, the house was burglarized and everything that was in there was stolen. And so those 2 feather lays that I had done are gone. But when I reflect on the work that I did back then and what I do today, no comparison. Oh, whoever has it, well, you know, you have my first works, but it's really ugly in comparison to what I produce today, so it's okay. And so that was in the 60s, and then in the early 1970, we had a classmate, Ronald Mullaney, whose mother, Auntie Elaine, was very instrumental in the Hawaiian community. And she approached my mother to instruct on making of the feather lays. And Mom says, teach. You know, all this while she had done it, but she had never been in a situation where she actually taught a class other than to me. And she said, yes, I know you can do this. She says, okay, we'll do this. So our Queen Emma Hawaiian Civic Club was a stepping stone for that. And we've been doing it ever since. In the late 70s, we were approached by Lahela Ka'aihue, who was a student at Punahou at the time. And she asked us to come and give a presentation. And she says, but not just how to make, but give us information, cultural values back of and surrounding this particular art. And back then, we didn't refer to this as art as much as we referred to it as a craft. We were craftspeople, we did craft. But then we have come to know and understand that there is a distinct difference between art and craft. We are master of our craft, but we're even a better master at the art that we present through our craft. So it's defining, it's your understanding of what those words mean. So many times when you say, okay, we're going to do arts and crafts, you automatically think scissors, paper, paste, glue. Well, this goes beyond that. It's a little more quality. In fact, people now are defining it more as a fine art rather than just an art or a craft. So in our doing of our research, we had to kind of delve a little more, because what Mom had been taught in making of the item is what I had been taught. And so I could tell you how, and I could sit and work and make a lei. But as for the understanding of where the feathers came from originally, how the, thank you, Harmony, how the, who was it that gathered the feathers? When did they do all of this is something that we started uncovering as we read. So I brought with me an example, which you can see on here, posted on the glass. A couple of the birds that were used for the making of the feather lei, the feather cape, the feather helmet. And these birds were found in the forest here, on all the islands. And here meaning literally here. Because geographically, you know, we didn't have all of this houses up on the mountain ridge. And of course, the ocean structure was more here than it is today. You know, the landmass has grown taller, development, we've filled in land, taken out, and created a whole nother atmosphere. But literally, our forests were here. Our hale were near the shoreline. You all understand the concept of the ahupua, from the mountain to the ocean. We also understand the concept of the rights and the privileges of the people. We were also given an understanding of where our place was in the system of our people. Our po'e were very, very smart and intelligent people, and they didn't just sit around like so many people have this goofy idea that, you know, we're fun-loving people, we drink, we play music, we dance hula, go fishing, and lay around under the sun. No. Very bad concept. You know, we're becoming a little more functional in that we're not sitting back and saying, yeah, that's how we are, or that's what we do, or so and so forth. We stand up a little taller because we can say, this is what we do, this is what we're involved with, and this is what we understand, and this is what our ancestors have given us. So, the Kanaka, the man that went out and did the searching and the gathering of these feathers, were mindful of these birds, the four examples that are there, the top two birds pictures, the mamo and the o'o, the mamo on the right and the o'o on the left. They're artist concepts. If you were to go to the Bishop Museum and go into the stacks back there, you could actually see the structure of the bird a little more closely. The mamo, pretty close in that you can't really see the yellow under feathers. On the o'o's feathers, they didn't look like that where the feathers were sticking out on the side of the wings. If you have lovebirds or parakeets or such, you know that until they stretch their wings out, you don't see some of the color. So this is a concept. It's a visual concept by the artist. But just to know that there were so few feathers yellow feathers off of those birds, when you look at a cloak or a helmet and see the predominance of those birds' feathers, you can well imagine how many birds there must have been living here in all of the island spaces, like the doves you see today, like the pigeons you see today, or the bulbul, or the minor birds, or whatever. They were here. They were very prevalent because they would only take, during molting season from the ground, the feathers as they walked along, picking them up and putting them in their eke, and then bringing it down to the hale area, and there they would sit and tie and bundle all of their feathers. Now, I'm going to have you look at examples of some of these feathers up close and a little personal. In here are examples. This long wispy feather here is the o'o. These are single feathers. This is mamo. Okay, the green and the red in there are amakihi and o'u. The red is the apapane. This is o'o and apapane. There's mamo and o'o in here, and this is iivi. And they would gather during molting season whatever they could gather from the ground. This is o'o. These little ones are mamo. And they would take and put 5 to 7 feathers in a bundle. And when you think about the capes and the cloaks and the helmets, and there are that many feathers on a puka, on the netting, for the cape or for the helmet, our birds were thick. We had numerous birds, and to know that both of those species are gone today. They're gone. The mamo has been gone for over a century. The o'o, the last evidence of that bird was just before Hurricane Iniki, and that was almost 11 years ago. That's the last time that bird was recorded on Kauai. So, and because it was within our time, when you think about the wind velocity, the destruction of the land from Hurricane Eva, just 10 years before that, the forest hadn't regained its growth. The birds themselves are no bigger than your fist. And that wind velocity blew them away. I mean, it's surprising we even have the birds that we have today. Many of our birds, of course, are found in the tree. They're not ground-boring animals. They lived in the trees. Now, if you go to Midway or those atolls there, most of the birds are underground or near rocks, because it's an atoll. But here we have the mountains, we have the trees, we have so much for their element, their natural environment. And so when looking at our iiwi and apapane, you can still find them today if you go to the mountains. We have to go way up 3, 4, 5 miles to get to even see them, unless you're on Molokai and you can go up the ranch. They're there. Or if you go up Saddle Road with your car rental that says you cannot, you go up there and you see them, eating from the lehua or eating from the berries that they find and so forth. I sat there I was supposed to be picking ohelo berries, but I couldn't because they knew I can't touch them, and so they were just flying right here. They just kept flying around and calling out to each other. Art Center and sitting out amongst the trees and just hearing them and seeing them flying around is just incredible. But these,
Do you have apapane and iiwi here?
yes. If you go to Schofield and you go up the Waianae mountainside, it's up in there. When we went up, not Waianae, excuse me, Ko'olau. When we went up the Waianae side, up to the bog where the forest reserve is, we could hear them, but I didn't see any. But you'd really have to focus. We went from Waianae side and went back of the mountain that side. We ran into the peacocks and the thrushes and all those, but I didn't see any. Because you have to have a real trained eye and good binoculars and sit with a lot of patience and watch. So just now with your seeing the actual bird's feathers and what the sizes are, and then in there gathering them. This lei belongs to us now, but this was part of my great-grandmother's collection. And the red feather is the apopane, and the green is the o'u, and it's native Hawaiian. And it's done on olona fiber, which is the cordage that was used in those days. And today, actually last year was the first time I got to see the plant. I kept asking friends, I said, I want to see the plant, because I know the fiber that we use, but I want to see the plant. Well, they kept bringing me the fiber. I don't want the fiber, I want to see the plant. So I guess they felt I wasn't healthy enough to go take a hike, literally. But last year, I finally got to go up to Tantalus, and I got to see the plant. And this fiber that they get from the inner surface of the olona plant, the olona looks very much, the bark looks very much like hibiscus, that gray-green bark. And you know, when you scratch your finger on there, or the hau, you get that outer skin off, and inside are these fibers. And the plant itself grows fairly tall and straight, like the vauke, if it's clipped and prepared properly. But this is the inner fiber, and this is what they use for their cordage and their tying material. Today we use yarn, we use ribbon, we use thread, because it's what we have today. And that's the material that's at hand. The other fiber that's on here is ie, and that they use for the helmets and for the images like the kukailimoku and so forth. We don't do that. We have friends that do the weaving. They have done and experimented making the baskets for the structure of the kukailimoku images. And they have taken and scraped the bark, and they use the olona. But in our practicality, we don't. Only because why would I want to put dyed goose feathers on something so typically Hawaiian, which is part of my ancestry, and cover it all up? Really poho. So if I'm going to do this, I'll do with what my mom had taught me, using yarn, ribbon, and thread, and using dyed materials. Since I cannot get our native bird species enough, we do have Hawaiian gathering rights, but I think with the few feathers we would find, we could only make a ring. You know, there's nothing you could do to make a lei, such as my grandmother's, my great-grandmother's lei. Now, inside this circle, this lady here belonged to her also, but she didn't do feather work. My great-grandmother was a socialite, so she bought, or it was given. And this lei inside here is dyed duck. Now, there have been many people, when I was working at the Bishop Museum way back, the olden days, they would come in and they'd say, you know, I have a lei from my family collection. It's over 100 years old. And I just know it's mamo. Why don't you bring it in and let's take a look at it? Inevitably, they would come in with a lei that would look like this, or a lei that would look like this. This is dyed duck. This is not mamo, it's not apopane, it's duck. And they're crushed. I said, duck? Yeah. Oh, not. Well, this is from my tutu. I had it over 100 years. And we said, well, you know, okay, this is 1970. 1870. What was going on in our culture and history then? 17. You know, you got to go back a little farther than that. Already in the 18 or late 1700s, we already had silk introduced by all the merchants that were coming in, dyed materials. So much was already being traded and bartered and used within our own artistry that they used dyed duck because our feathers were already on the decline. People were changing their way of life. They were no longer just working in their kuleana, but they were taking care of other things. The man's job was shifting also. So this fellow who was the person responsible for gathering the feathers had another job now. He didn't have time to get the feathers. Plus, the land was changing. The inhabitants was changing. So these birds, eventually, when they couldn't get enough feathers to make a feather item, they would have to kill the bird and take the birds for its feathers. But they would use the bird for food. But it wasn't a common practice. Eventually, diseases, other birds, and yes, the demand for feathers was the demise of our birds. We're lucky that we have the few that we have left in species, and we're taking care of them. But we're not going to go out and gather their feathers to make a feather lei, because not enough, not near enough, let alone a cloak or a helmet. But we've had people who are quite excited. This picture in the center is this here with the olona fiber used for the netting. And when we had our class to learn how to do that, this is olona and this is cotton fishnet. And today we can't even find the fishnet at the fishing supply stores because it's an illegal hole. The puka is too small. So no more. So in order to do the cape today, if you wanted to do that, because you have to go down and get yardage from the fabric store, which is a mesh net, just so principally you would have a netting. And then you wouldn't be getting our small little tiny majiro feathers or bobo or any of the others because it would take forever to collect enough. So you have to use dyed goose, dyed duck, dyed pheasant, whatever materials are available today. We have a couple of students over the years that are a little bit anal, but they felt they wanted to try it. So in this package, this fella took, and you recognize the feather itself. It's that ring collar of the big dove, the big gray pigeon dove, and this is his neck feathers. And he gathered these out in Haleiwa because got plenty, and they molt or roadkill or whatever. So they picked the feathers, they cleaned it, and they tied it into the bundles with olona fiber. And so it can be done, but do you have the time? Yeah. So what we've done today, and since 1956 when my mother learned, and we do as a common practice, is we call and we get all of our feathers from New York. We call Mr. Michael Schwartz on Long Island and say, Michael, I need 5 pounds of blue, I need 5 pounds of ilima, I need 5 pounds of red, I need 5 pounds of green. Whatever color I need, I can call and order. And in the mail comes these big boxes full of feathers. Now, since opening, my mother teaching me in 1962, then teaching into the community started in 1970, and we do it till today, 2002. I've been doing it with my mom on a daily basis for the last 10 years, Monday through Friday, 9 to 9, Saturday, 9 to 5, at Kapahulu at our shop. Sundays we're closed, but otherwise we do this daily. And we always recommend that if you're going to come for a lesson or to come look just to see what it is we have, you should call. Because of our interest throughout the community, people want to learn how to do the lei, whether it be the vili poi poi or the vili kamoi. They want to learn. So we do go out into the community. And the community isn't just Oahu. We go to all the neighbor islands, and we go to the mainland. We've been throughout the South Pacific, as well as to the Orient. And it's because of this interest in the art. And so in order for us to provide supplies for our students, we have to call a feather company and order feathers in bulk. Now, once it comes to us, 5 pounds, we take and we weigh them into 2-ounce packages. And we have a little scale we set up, and we take the feathers and we weigh it 2 ounces at a time. Put it in a plastic bag and it goes in a bin. So when you come in, you can pick the color you want. However, you can't just take the feather and make your lei. There's a process. So you need to take your feathers out of the plastic bag, And they come like this. And, you know, a lot of our students go, oh, the lei is finished already. No, no. You don't just put a ribbon and put it on. No. You need to take and pull these all off the string. And we don't know what little sweatshop sews all of these feathers together. But we pull it all apart. And we take a pillowcase. It's not the family favorite. Turn it inside out so the raw edge is outside. Put the feathers into the pillowcase. Secure it at the top real well. Several times with cotton string. Several knots. Then you're going to dampen the pillowcase quickly and throw it into the dryer. Half an hour, medium-high heat. And then what that does is not only get rid of the excess residue of dye, but it also opens your feathers up. So every feather has a nice edge to it. Because when we get it from the dyers, you got stuff that looks kind of aleke and crooked and gnarly. So we want them to look really nice when we start to work with them. And once we get that process done, already looking at a good half hour plus just to do that part, then you have to cut your feathers. Now, when we do the vili poi poi lei, this style, all of these here, this is vili poi poi. This is the round. Vili is to tie. Poi poi is the feathers are going out. And so this is your cylinder style of lei, vili poi poi. We want to make the feathers, obviously, we're not going to make them as little as the feathers you see there. So we're going to take and measure our feathers 1 inch in length. And this is the feather you're going to work with. It's not anywhere like what you have there. We don't have to put 5 or 6 of these together. We just use this single feather. And because we're so multi-ethnic and we just can't, you know, I mean, we tease the Chinese a lot. We're so pake, what do we do with this pot? We can't, you know, we're not going to throw this away. Well, you can measure that again another inch from the base of the V, so you have a second cut on your feather. And if you really pake, you can use this, I guess. But by then, this quill is so thick, just kiloi, just throw it away. But in that process, cutting all of your 2 ounces of feathers after you've had your half an hour of wet and dry, you've got another 6 to 10 hours just cutting your materials. And then you can start putting it together. Okay, we use yarn, ribbon, and thread, and the technique that we use, this 1 inch feather, we use it for our vili poi poi. Now, the feather itself has a slight curve, but not enough. So you have to pinch the midrib of the feather. So it literally curves out so that it's turning outward this way so that you can apply it to your lei. And each feather has to be tied one at a time, single strand. And fortunately, we don't have to go out and harvest the olona and go make our fiber. We can use the thread from the local fabric store. And you place on the yarn base, you're going to wrap your base 3 times. And you do a half hitch to secure that feather in place. And then turn and apply your next feather. So, 1, 2, 3, and you do a half hitch, anchor it there, turn and place your next feather. There's anywhere from 30 to 40 feathers in an inch on your lei. And if you're doing a 23-inch lei, you do the math. That's more than I really want to know. I know that approximately 2 ounces of feathers will make this lei. Approximately. So if you look at 5 to 7 feathers in each of the bundles that was used to make the feather leis or the capes or the helmets, you can well imagine how many birds there were existing on the Aina at one time. So you got to keep eating ducks and chickens so we can keep getting feathers, okay? Now, this is chicken feathers. This is the barred rock, or Rhode Island red, or Rock Island road, or whatever. It's a chicken. but this is its natural colors. And for those of you that are my age or older, you remember family having pillows with chicken feathers. This is the chicken feathers. Okay, that's the chicken. Because when I talk to the po'e haole, when I do the elder hostel, and I say Rhode Island Red, I usually get somebody correcting me, so I'm not sure whether it's a Rock Island Road or Rhode Island. You can write a song after a while. You know, it makes me think about that anyway. So after you've cut your feathers and prepared them to do the vili poi poi lei, you're looking at a 1-inch length of feather to do this. Now, when Harmony called me and when Palani spoke to me about doing this, they said, can you teach a class? Not in the time we have. There's no way, you know. But just to give you, kind of whet your appetite, if you need to do a project or something that you really wanted to do, this is the commercial. You can always call Kapahulu Avenue, Auntie Mary Lou's Nalima Mili Huli no Eau, and we would gladly set up a time for you to come and learn how to do this. But you're getting, you know, the gist of it, yeah? Now, excuse me. So what do you do with the koina? What do you do with this second cut? Well, you can make a lei like this too. This is using the second cut in the vili poi poi style, using that second portion and applying the feathers the same way. You crimp the feathers and you lay it on the base and you wrap 3 times and do a half hitch and you continue. This lei is much more forgiving than this lei, because this one you have to be a little more precise. This one you can fudge a little bit. So first cut and second cut. Okay. Now, color-wise, this is about as close as we can come to the o'u and apapani, the o'u and the o'u and the akialoa. There's 3 different species that give us a green. But when we ordered feathers from New York, this Jewish man does not understand, you know, colors. When we say red, well, we're pretty safe with red. But when we say ilima, aole kalima, yeah, he doesn't know what ilima. So it's golden rod or parrot gold or, you know, that kind of thing. Duh. So when we order it, we figured all of these years, 30 years working with this man, he would know the color we want. Well, as you can see, you get different dye lots. So when we have groups working on projects, we try to make sure we have the same dye lot. So if a halau is coming in, we will try to make sure that when we order their feathers, we have enough for that group. But everybody's hand is different. So the density, so you may run out. So we caution. This is why there's 2 shades on this lei, because the lady ran out. So she had to hemo her whole lei and start, and so she did a pauku or sectional lei in order to make this lei the green that she wanted. And we've had that happen. They get 3/4 way and they come back and doesn't have the same shade. And they say, so what do I do, Auntie? I said, take it all off. No, no, I'll wait till you get the next shipment. Maybe the same color will come again. You may not make your lei for 3 years, but, you know. So anyhow, we try to get the colors as close to the color of our native bird species, but it's not always possible. Because right now, the color green that I have in the shop is like neon green. And so people go, oh, I don't think so, Auntie. Okay, fine. Don't you want to do it with pink? You know, no, 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 no. Okay, so that's the vili poi poi style of making of the lei, hand tying, which is very typically traditional in format, but using a single feather as opposed to tying our feathers together. Now, just an example of tying the feathers together. If you were to have loose feathers like our ancestors did, they had to measure them tip to tip so that the balance was even. Then they would take and lay the feather across their finger, take the thread or the olona fiber that they used, and they would literally have to do the 3 wraps and the half hitch at the base where the feather was its slenderest. Then they pull all of the loose hulu down, and about a ½ inch below that, tie it off again, and this was your bundle of feathers, and they would put it in the eke. So remember now, those little tiny feathers, 5 to 7 feathers in a bundle, and then they would then keep gathering to do the feather item they were going to work on. So lots more work than we do today. The other technique was traditional, was the lei ka moi. This is when we use the feathers for obvious reason, moi, laying down, go to sleep. So this is why we call this a lei ka moi. Vili ka moi actually, because vili is the tie and moi is the laying down. This feather you would take and cut 1.5 inches in length after the wet and dry process so the feather is longer. And this would then be applied by laying the feather down and doing the 3 wraps and half hitch. Now, inside of this lei and inside this lei are strands of yarn. We use 4 strands for this base and 16 strands for this base. And that's to give it much more support. With the vili poi poi lei, your feathers are turning outward. You're using a narrower base. With the lei ka moi, you need a heavier base to support the feathers that you're placing on there. We have had students that have done 4 strands of yarn, but then adjusting the feather length to do a lei ka moi using 1 inch instead of 1.5 inches. So it's adaptable. And here again, you can do a first and second cut. This is a koina vili with a second cut feather. And here again, it's laying the feather down in the moi fashion. But this is second cut, and this is first cut. Okay, now my mom did this lei when she was in southern Illinois at my sister's house in the dead of winter in front of the fireplace because there was no place to go. So she finished this in 2 weeks. She worked on it quite diligently because there was no place to go in southern Illinois. Now, looking at the 2 styles of lei, poi poi and ka moi, when I went to Kauai, some years ago to teach, I saw a lei structured very much like this in their museum's collection. We call it the lei Mauna Loa because now we've patterned it so it looks like the orchid lei. But here again, it's all done in the vili technique where you hand tied. There's 4 strands of yarn in here. You're cutting your feathers 1.5 inches for the outside and 1.25 inches for the center. You lay your feather so the feather is turning outward. Do the 3 wraps and half hitch. Huli it over, directly opposite. Place the other feather, 3 wraps and a half hitch. Then you turn it to the center and you do your moi this way, tie it on, then huli on this side and do lei ka moi on this side. So in essence, you're doing 4 feathers around in one section to create this lei Mauna Loa style. And we have students now doing them in various colors, lei Mauna Loa, but it's vili. So it's more contemporary than it is more traditional. But the technique in which it was done is very much like what our ancestors did. Then I saw one at the Bishop Museum when I was employed there, long time ago. This was on somebody's hat, like that. And it was lei poi poi, creating your flower, 5 petals around. Then you take a drop of about 1/2 inch and you do your lei ka moi to create your kalek. So here's your flower. And you just do that all the way down. So this is one of the simpler styles, but it's best to learn this, and then go play with this. Yeah, this is a little more contemporary. Then we had a student that created this patterning, and we call it the rosebud for obvious reasons, because that's what it looks like. And it's the lei ka moi, but there's definitely a division between each bud, and that's created by a straw. The best straws at that time was from Kenny's Burger House up Camp Shopping Center. That's why you cannot get straws at the counter anymore. They have them behind or under the counter because too many people are going over there and taking the straws and they'll make lei. But, and feathers, yarn, whatever, but they would take the straws. McDonald's has good straws too. But we found that it's okay, but it's very light. So recently we found that through another student, because we're always learning as well, they used pony beads, and that gave it weight. So that way you could put them in between each flower that you were making. And so here again, it's vili, but it's doing it in a more modern style. Any questions so far? Okay. Well, just because I'm right here, this is the only book in all of the islands that's a complete instructional book on how to do the feather work. And this was produced by my mom and I. We authored it and edited it with some help. And the illustrations in here on how to do all of this work was done by David Parker from Kaneohe. And he did all of the drawings in here. My dad is photographed in here. He took our picture in our yard. So that's his photo skills. But in here is a picture of my dad, and he's standing with two capes, these two here. This one here is my mom's. It took her 13 years to complete. And this one is mine, and it still looks like that today. When you come to the shop, it still looks like that. I'm not finishing it because I don't have time. But it's a good visual aid, and it's a good instructional tool on how to do the feather cape. And it's very basic. It's not really detailed to a point where it's an art. It's definitely an art. But that's our commercial, and so you can find this at the bookstores. And we're going to have to go to a third printing pretty soon because it's being used more and more often because of its instruction. We consider, my mom and I, this as traditional. This style of lei making, the lei humu papa, we consider more contemporary, only because this particular style of lei was not done until metal needles were introduced to the islands. Our needles that they used in days of old for their kapa, for their sails and so forth, were done with bone, shell, coral. Now, if you try to stick a bone needle through fabric, you're not going to get very far. And of course, most of the leis that you see that were done back in the late 1800s or so were done with kolohala. They were done on flannel, all materials not native to Hawaii. Pheasants were introduced, peacocks were introduced, flannel. We didn't have flannel, we had kapa. We didn't have metal needles. We didn't have this type of thread. So when you look at many of the old leis, this is my grandpa's, and this is a picture of him wearing his lei. This was his hat when he was home in the islands. When he was in Japan, he wore it on a felt hat, but he wore it all the time because my grandpa was bald, so he had to protect himself. But you can see by this lei that it's sunburnt, or if you didn't notice, it's kind of lost its luster. But this is the same feather, and you can see the shine that this once had. But this is from exposure, constant exposure. There was a question earlier about conservation and how to keep things. Once they've been sunburnt like this, you cannot bring it back. Don't put oils. Don't try to go find something that you can rub and hopefully get it back. No, it's gone. Use it, enjoy it, just know where it belonged, who it belonged to, and just wear it. People will still look at it admiringly, not realizing that it is sunburnt or that it's lost its luster. But this is the chest feather of the kolohala, which was one of the favorite feathers to use for the leis. Now, using mattress tatting, using muslin, using the fabric of the time, again, was difficult because the ladies traded. They got the fabric from the missionary women. They used the mattress tatting of the sheeting that was used, that came from the ships. And we were even surprised that we found some, one lei, when we turned it over, was done on not literally shark skin, but shark skin fabric. Remember how, oh, well, some of you wouldn't remember shark skin skirts, but we do, yeah? There's some of us that I can still relate to that are in my age category, some of you too young. Anyway, this hat and this lei, this is done with the kolohala. This is done with the gray almond, which is in the rump of the bird, this part here. And this large heart is from this area here. I found this lei on Fillmore Street in an antique store, and I got it for $5 because they didn't know what they had. And the backing was flannel. The stitching I recognized. When I was a student at Kamehameha in the 60s, we worked in the gift shop. This was made by a lady from upcountry Maui. So it's, to me, very precious. And so people tell me, oh, well, you spent $5, I'll give you 10. No, it's mine. It's mine. I'm not separating myself from it. But you just never know where you're going to find some of our Hawaiian work. And when it came to the Humu Papale, the colors, it was purely your choice. The feathers you had exposure to. This I just did last month. And so there's peacock in there, Chinese golden pheasant, ringneck pheasant, melanistic pheasant. And this lei was done, and this is also mine. I'm very possessive with my stuff. But this is done with a mallard ducktails feathers, and there's only 2 on a duck. So a lot of butts on this lei. And so we can get pheasant from New York. We can get, this guy here is also mine, but it's the wing feather, the shoulder wing feather of the peacock. You see that electric blue? Took me 2 years to collect enough of these feathers to make a lei, because there's not that many on a bird. And this I could buy by the pound, this I cannot. So this is mine. And I've had people wait up to 3 years to get enough for me to make their lei so that I can collect the feathers. And so when it comes to doing the humu papa, we do a sewing technique, and we use felt today. The feathers again have to be washed. When we get a skin like this, it has to be washed. This is still on the body of the bird. We take and we put it in a solution of woolite or Dawn in a basin. Rinse it off in a colander. Put it in the pillowcase, throw it in the dryer. Then we pluck the feathers off per section as you work with it. But we can also call Mr. Schwartz and say, we want a pound of almond, we want a pound of large heart, we want a pound of the red heart. And then we get them in and we wash them. So when you come into class, we don't wash, wet and dry the goose feathers because there's too many. But the natural feathers my mom does wash, except for the pelts. And then you select and design the lei as you want to work on it. Okay? And we're running out of time, but does anybody have any questions? Yes?
Well, you gotta do some finger exercises before you do the lei?
No. Actually, as you're working, you are, because you're doing this. Because you're pinching the feather. I have calluses on my finger holding that and working with it, because you don't want to, misplace or have the feather shift on you. When you're stitching, you can poke yourself a lot, but it's really up to you. Yeah. We also teach kahili lele, or hand kahilis. We have done all of the kahilis at the Kamehameha School Chapel. It was a 2-year project my parents did. If you go to the Premier Club lounges on any of the islands for Hawaiian Airlines, all the leis in there are done by me. At the Outrigger Wailea, there are 22 leis that I've made along with 1 student. And so there are numerous pieces that are done by my mom and I and our family over the years. So.
Another question.
Yeah.
What's the price ranges on those wings?
Okay. On a dyed goose feather lei, like this, well, this one I have a tag on it already. This is a 24.5-inch length lei. It's $196. But if you started to do this and did all of that process, and it took 20 to 80 hours to do, you would not part with it at $8 an inch. I can guarantee you that. You would probably frame it and put it up before you would sell it. Or somebody would have to be really special for you to give it up. Yeah? Also, we've had people come in and want to do these as graduation gifts. I said, if you're going to do that, you have to make sure that that lei doesn't go on the person, because this kind of stuff goes on top of it. The Anuenue School, the seniors, this is a 5th year, they make their own leis for graduation. They come for class. Punana Leo Kuaihao, the parents come and learn, and they make their leis for their students for graduation. Now, Nawahi, on the Big Island, the parents and the students do the graduating classes lays, the student themselves. Out Waianae, most of the immersion schools now are now picking up on this, and they come for classes or we go out to teach them. Okay? Thank you very much for your attention.